jump right in to our conversation today with Paul. So let me get started here for a couple slides. And so before I go on, I want to remind you our next summer series is about a month from now, July 21st, and we're going to talk about managing hybrid and remote teams. As a reminder, all three of our topics this summer were a result of suggestions made by our participants, our alumni, and so one of the things in this world we talked about was meeting in hybrid teams. So hopefully you'll find that with Brad extremely. He just wrote a new book on this. So anyway, we're going to be hot off the press with that. Also, would like to remind you of our all-day annual summit that's coming in September the 22nd. That is right before an NC State home football game, strategically placed there. So don't forget that as you're looking for there. We're pretty excited about that. I'm going to ask Jessica to kind of drop the agenda in your chat if you want to look at it. But we got some really good. I was just sharing with Paul. We got some really good presenters there. Again, presenters you would not normally get to hear. We're going to have Tracy Golden and her husband Russell. Tag team. He was a former chair of FASB, if that name sounds familiar. She was a chair of the AICPA, and we're going to have a round robin discussion with them about what's going on in their world. We're going to chat. GDP is very important, so we are going to have Bill Rand is going to help us understand what we should know about Chat GPT. And this may sound like an oxymoron to a lot of you, but we're going to have an accounting influencer. You know, that may sound strange to you, but we've found an accounting influence of all places in Charlotte. And so Jessica and I had a conversation earlier this week, but we're looking forward to having an accounting influencer. And we have our own MAC alumni. Fran Lawrence is now the controller of NC State, so he's going to join us for lunch and have some remarks. Beth Ritter is going to talk about conflict resolution, again, a faculty member here at NC State. And we have our own Nathan Golden, which is on, hey, Nathan out there, as well as Robert Broom, to talk about a tax panel from both the tax law and a little bit of the lobbying little p perspective on that. So we're looking forward to that panel as well. And it's going to be followed up by that all important ethics class that you need to keep your license active. So if you haven't had a chance to sign up for that, please sign up for that. We're going to have an exciting day with our lifelong learning. So let me go through the housekeeping tours related to CPE. You probably might know these, but just a refresher. If you please remain online for the whole time. 50 minutes to get you 1 hour, 60 minutes to give you 1.2 hours. Those are all important. 0.2. I think most of you have your name, but it's very important that we see your first and last name so Jessica knows who is on today. You will have 4 polling questions coming out. You need to answer at least 3 of those. We had some fun with the polling questions, so anyway, please answer those as they come out today. And at the end, you'll get a survey to complete. The survey is very important to us. Particularly one of the questions in there is, are you looking for CPE or not? So make sure you fill that out so Jessica will get your CPE certificate to you. We do need all items completed to be able to be able to grant you CPE. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing. Okay. So I can see all the smiley faces out there. Great, you guys are looking good today. So I'm really excited. I think we have a very unique opportunity today to talk with the SEC Chief Accountant Paul Munter. We're anticipating an engaging section, just like in prior times. So feel free to drop any questions you have in the chat. We'll be glad to pick those up. May stop a couple of times if you want to go in, Mike, and ask questions as well. That's okay to be able to do that. With that, I'm just going to ask Paul some questions, and he's just going to respond for that. And so with that, Paul, you've served in a variety of roles in your career, academia, public accounting, and now as a regulator. Why don't you just provide, if you would, a brief summary of all your various experiences, because it's pretty extensive as a way of introduction.
Yeah, sure. Happy to, Scott. And thanks for having me. Let me start off by first telling you that, as Scott told you, I'm the Chief Accountant of the SEC, which means I have to tell you that any views that I express here are my own, don't necessarily represent those of the commission, any of our commissioners or other members of the SEC staff. Also good to see some familiar names and faces here today as well. So Scott, I think your question was a polite way of saying that I've meandered a bit in my career and have had a number of different experiences, opportunities. Now, kind of do a quick chronology, I suppose, of some of the stops along the journey. And like, I guess a lot of people, when I finished my undergraduate work, I went into public accounting. I was working with a regional accounting firm out in California, which is where I grew up, and was in their audit practice, dealing with a lot of smaller, mid-sized companies, a lot of which in agribusiness kind of activities that we were working with, and got to a lot of fun things like grain elevator inventory and stockyard inventory and things like that. So we didn't use drones or those kind of things to take inventory back in those days, and we were very oftentimes out doing inventory close to midnight on New Year's Eve in many years. So I did that for about 2 or 3 years, and then had an opportunity to go back to school, pursue a PhD at the University of Colorado. Received my PhD and then took an academic position at Texas Tech University in Lubbock, Texas. Spent about 10 years there, managed to successfully progress through the ranks from assistant professor to associate professor to full professor. And then about that point, I had an opportunity to move to the University of Miami and serve as the department chair there for a number of years. But after about 6 years there, I was eligible for sabbatical. And when I had the opportunity to take a sabbatical, I had an opportunity to join KPMG's audit practice, or as Scott will remember, back then, Pete Marwick Mitchell's audit practice in the early 90s. And so I went into that, spent actually 2.5 years in the audit practice, actually as a signing partner, leading engagements, signing audits and the like. I try to keep that a secret so that people don't ask me to do too much of that anymore. And statute of limitations has run out on all of those engagements. And then after that, I went back to the University of Miami, spent another about 6 years there, and was eligible for another sabbatical, which happened to work out very well because I was asked if I would be interested in going to the SEC as an academic fellow. And so I took the opportunity to use that sabbatical to join the Office of the Chief Accountant at the SEC. Timing is really, creates lots of opportunities in life. And so my first day at the SEC was on August 1st of 2002. Those of you that are real historians of things will probably recognize that Sarbanes-Oxley Act was signed on July 30th of 2002. So literally 2 days before my arrival. And so I spent 2 years there working on a lot of the Sarbanes-Oxley rulemakings and improvements and the like, and had just a tremendous experience. And after that, I was planning to go back to the University of Miami, and literally did. And the very first day I was back in my office, I got a phone call from somebody at KPMG International Office and asked me if I would be interested in talking about a role in KPMG's national office. And my answer to these kind of questions are usually, yeah, no harm in talking and see if it makes sense. And so I was offered the opportunity to come into KPMG's national office, where I got to meet and engage with Scott in a number of different capacities. So I joined there Ended up being there for about 15 years. Did a number of different things, both on the US GAAP side of accounting and on IFRS side, and also on audit quality initiatives and the like, engaging with the PCAOB and engaging internationally. At that point, I retired from KPMG and had returned to academics. I was teaching at the University of Colorado. And when I was there, I was asked if I would be interested in coming back to the SEC in a role of deputy chief accountant for international activities. And having spent, a number of years at KPMG working in the international arena, that was very attractive. And so I put my name in the hat, was fortunate enough to be selected to take on that role. And so I returned to the SEC in 2019. And about a year after I had rejoined, the chief accountant left, and I was asked to step in as the acting chief accountant and subsequently have been named the chief accountant. So I've been back in the SEC in these varying roles for about 4 years. And so that kind of brings me up to the current day, Scott.
Great. I think you just had a way of saying you and I were old, but I'll just let that go, Paul, and we will move on. Okay. So anyway, there's
experienced, I think is the word, Scott.
Experience. Yeah, you could put it that way. And hopefully that knowledge check question you just saw, how to answer that one based on what you just saw on that. So with that, you talked about becoming the acting chief accountant, and then before you became the chief accountant. So I think a lot of people are probably interested, how does that process work? I mean, how do you get from being the acting chief accountant to the accountant? What does that process look like? Understanding Washington is probably an interesting place to be.
Yeah, Washington is an interesting place to be. And I guess, first of all, I feel really fortunate to be at this stage of my life and my career and be in a position where I can do some things that are beneficial to our markets and beneficial to investors and hopefully beneficial to the profession as well. And just as a little perspective, the SEC, we just had our 89th birthday here about 2 weeks ago. And in that time, I'm the 19th chief accountant. So it's not like chief accountants fall off of trees in terms of the landscape. And just by frame of reference, I think there have been 35 chairs of the SEC. So roughly twice as many chairs as there have been chief accountants. But the leadership of any of our offices or divisions is appointed by the chair with the affirmation of the commissioners. So it is the chair that makes that determination. I was appointed as the acting chief accountant by then acting chair Commissioner Allison Lee, and I feel very, very fortunate that she did. I think her view, I don't know that I want to put too many words in her mouth, but my guess is that since she was acting chair, she didn't really want to identify a quote permanent chief accountant with a new chair coming in shortly thereafter, which is why I think she appointed me to the acting role. And I think the acting role, it kind of depends on the time, the place, the makeup of the commission, what the priorities are, and the like, as to whether it is a let's call it a time period to evaluate whether I might be a candidate for the chief accountant position, or it's just kind of a caretaker, not to be too pejorative, until the next person comes in. And I think there's been some of each as you look back over the history. But the chair, several months ago asked me if I had an interest in serving as the chief accountant as opposed to the acting chief accountant. And I told him, absolutely did. And so I was very fortunate that he, along with the other commissioners, made that designation. In terms of what I do day to day, it doesn't really change things, but it does certainly change perceptions in the eyes of some. So I think that's a healthy difference. But I feel very, very privileged to have this opportunity.
Great. You talked about your activities. I'm sure your activities are pretty varied. So could you give us a little sprinkling of some of the things you get involved in your role?
Yeah, what's really interesting about it is probably the breadth and depth of things that we get involved in. The chief accountant is, by commission rules, the principal advisor to the commission on accounting and auditing matters under the federal securities laws. And obviously that means there's a technical aspect to the role. And I spent a lot of time dealing with technical accounting and auditing issues when I was in practice, of course. But that's really I don't want to underplay it because it's really important, and the consultation process is extremely important to try to drive consistency in financial reporting practices. But it's only a part of what we do. Another big part of what we do is oversight of standard setting on both the accounting and the auditing front. And so we have a lot of engagement with the FASB on accounting standard setting, with the PCAOB on audit standard setting internationally. I was literally on the phone this morning with the chair and vice chair of the IASB in my role as chair of the monitoring group. We oversee the International Auditing and Assurance Standards Board and the International Ethics Standards Boards for accountants. So a huge involvement in oversight of standard setting, which requires a balance, because you have to respect the independence of the standard setting, but oversight is not a perfunctory undertaking. It is a proactive engagement of sharing information and understanding what their priorities are, and helping to point them in directions where we see areas of improvement that could be made and the like. And so that takes up a lot of time. And then kind of other things across the agency. The Office of the Chief Accountant is basically a service office within the agency. So we spend a lot of time supporting colleagues in the Division of Corporation Finance who are doing filing reviews and questions and issues that come through that process. Unfortunately, we have to do enforcement, and that's part of the lay of the land. And we spend a lot of time engaging with our colleagues in enforcement on helping them work through issues and questions, and advising as to whether there's a case to be made, number one, and if so, how that case should be made, and what the remedies should be, and the like. A lot of the work we do also obviously deals in the fund space. So we engage very proactively with colleagues in the Division of Investment Management as they do reviews of filings by investment funds and the like. And we engage a lot with our Division of Trading and Market, particularly with respect to broker-dealer space. And so I get involved in a lot of things that I'd never, frankly, dealt with a lot in my career prior to this point. And then, of course, the commission does a lot of rulemaking in addition to the day-to-day things. And those of you that follow our rulemaking agenda know that we have a very active rulemaking agenda. And while a lot of the rulemaking doesn't directly bear on accounting and auditing, some of it does. And so we have heavy involvement in rulemaking that does have direct consequences to accounting and auditing application and practice. But even some of the ones that might not initially appear to have direct accounting and auditing implications have potential indirect implications. So we end up at a minimum reviewing pretty much any rulemaking that's going on, and in a lot of them having direct involvement. So like I say, it's really across the spectrum. And of course, you mentioned, Scott, the Washington landscape. As a federal agency, we are overseen by a House committee and a Senate committee. And so there are a lot of interactions that we have as an agency with the committees in total and with committee members. And so we have a lot of back and forth with them, both in terms of areas that they want to understand more about what we're doing and what we're thinking, but also in areas where they might be wanting to push legislation forward and trying to help them craft it in a way that is going to achieve the goals they're trying to achieve. So it's like, say, it's a very broad spectrum, which keeps it exciting that we have so many different kinds of things going on.
Sounds like you don't get much sleep at night with all that, but absolutely. Okay. So, question, I will remind everybody, feel free to drop any questions you have for Paul into the chat with that. But I have observed that you have you, I would call it, issued some stern messages to the profession, some on audit quality, some on independence and things like that. So I'm wondering how it feels that the fact you served so many years in the profession and now you're overseeing the profession. How does that feel when you do that?
Well, it's again, it goes back to having the opportunity to try to do what I can to drive improvements. As you were mentioning earlier, I've been fortunate to be a member of this profession for, a long time, all of my adult life. I'm very proud of the profession. I think the profession has served capital markets very well over, literally decades and decades, but there's always opportunities to do better. I think in, any walk of life, there are opportunities for improvements, some of which is trying to remind the profession of its responsibilities, and then some of which is trying to drive improvements. You think about audit quality. Audit quality is not static. Audit quality is a continuous improvement undertaking by its very nature. Some of which is improvements in what's going on in practice. Some of it's improvements in the standards. Some of it's improvements in oversight and regulation. So it's trying to be consistent in messaging about the responsibilities of the profession, number one. And some of it, frankly, as I talk to folks in the firms, particularly those that are in the audit practice, they find the messaging very helpful because a lot of firms, particularly the larger firms, of course, are composed of people not just in audit, but in other disciplines. And I think it is really crucial that accounting firms understand that while they certainly can have other service lines, and it's not my role to tell an audit or tell a firm what its business model should be. I want to be clear on that. But nevertheless, as an accounting firm, there is a responsibility to the profession and to the capital markets. And that is true regardless of where within the firm somebody might sit. And so if you think about independence violations, it's not the audit practice that lacks independence, it's the firm as a whole that lacks independence. And therefore, a commitment to professional ethics, a commitment to audit independence, and a commitment to audit quality, in my view at least, is something that has to be ingrained throughout the firm, regardless of where within the firm somebody sits. So it's trying to reinforce that messaging that I think has been a part of the profession's responsibilities, throughout, but can sometimes get lost in the noise. And then some of it is also about trying to reinforce the value of professionalism and the value of the profession to the capital markets.
Great. Appreciate that. I've got to play that back with my students now, so everybody remember that. So you mentioned earlier that you have oversight over other standard setters. So PCAOB being one of those. So how does that really work? How does the oversight of the PCAOB really work by the SEC?
Yeah, so the oversight of the PCAOB is a bit more hands-on than oversight of, say, the FASB, for example. Mm-hmm. So with the PCAOB, the commission appoints the board members, the commission approves its budget, and the commission also has to approve any standards or rules that the PCAOB issues before they become effective. And so we have to have a fairly proactive process, because at the end of the day, after the PCAOB does standard setting, I then have to go to the commissioners and advise them as to whether I think they should approve those standards. And candidly, if I end up in a position where I have to go say, they missed the mark here, that's not a happy position for me, for the commission, or for the PCAOB. So as a consequence of that, we have very regular and ongoing dialogue with the PCAOB, both at the board level and the staff level, kind of throughout, from the initial formation of a project, through the research they might be doing, through the scoping, through the development of proposals, through the evaluation of comments, and then through finalization. We have ongoing dialogue to understand what they're trying to accomplish, to understand whether we think that achieves the investor protection responsibilities that they have and we have, whether it will drive improvements in audit quality, and will do so in a fashion that is cost beneficial to the marketplace, so that when the time comes, I can very confidently go to the commission and recommend that they approve the work of the PCAOB.
You mentioned FASB briefly there. How would you contrast that with your oversight over FASB then?
Yeah, so our oversight with the FASB is a little more removed. So we do not appoint the members to the FASB. We do not appoint the trustees to the Financial Accounting Foundation. They ask us for input, and we provide names that they should consider. And our commissioners do have the opportunity to interview candidates. But again, it is a step removed, because ultimately the responsibility for appointment of board members rests with the trustees of the Financial Accounting Foundation. Likewise, when the FASB issues a standard, we don't have any approval process. That becomes GAAP. Obviously, it goes into codification and becomes part of a authoritative GAAP. But we have a very significant role in terms of application of it. As questions come up, we have consultations that we end up involved in on how a registrant should apply GAAP to their facts and circumstances. And obviously, we also have a lot of information that we get, both in our conversations with registrants and audit firms, about what are the issues they're seeing in practice, where's their diversity in practice that perhaps could be addressed. And we have a lot of dialogue with investors, investor groups, investor advocates, trying to understand what are their information needs that they aren't having fully satisfied right now. And so we do have a lot of dialogue with the FASB again, both the board level and the staff level, trying to share our thoughts about things they should be thinking about as they develop their agenda priorities and as they start scoping projects, and things they should think about in terms of where there might be interpretive guidance that's needed and the like. We certainly have a lot of back and forth as the board is deliberating and it is drafting proposals and drafting final standards. But it is, again, one step removed because we don't have an ultimate approval process. But I like to think that we have a very good working relationship, and where we share some things that we think are really important. I think that gets a lot of consideration by the FASB as they go through their due process.
Great. You mentioned earlier in your introduction that your time that you were an academic several times. How has that background actually helped you in the role that you have now? How is that a good credential to have?
I think it's helped me in a number of ways. One is it gives me an access to a network that perhaps some of my predecessors have not had as much. And a lot of the things that we do, we leverage academic research. You know, in our rulemaking, we certainly leverage it a lot. Those of you that watch the statements that we issue, you will find that a lot of times we draw on academic research in supporting some of the things that we are saying and messaging. So it gives me and us more broadly access to a lot of that might be more difficult to get access to. I think it gives me perhaps a little better understanding of the takeaways from academic research, including both the what you can derive from it and the limitations attached to it. And I think it gives me a pretty good perspective on a bit of a balance, because in a lot of cases, particularly when you're dealing with standard setting and rulemaking, is you're trying to strike a balance between, let's call it the perfect answer, overlaid with some pragmatism that needs to be brought to the table to have a response that will improve information investors are receiving, but do so in a manner that can be implemented in a reasonable fashion. So I think it helps me with that balance as well.
Similar, as you mentioned earlier, you also have that, that public accounting experience. So how has that also helped shape and inform you as you go forward?
Yeah, a couple of things I think come out of that. One is, again, back to the network. I think, I have a lot of people in my network that I know from that experience as well. That's extremely helpful when we're trying to figure out what are issues and who's seeing what and the like. And a lot of those kind of things is Scott, as you can especially appreciate, draw on personal relationships in the first instance, which is really helpful. Second is, an awful lot of what we do, particularly in the consultation side of practice, is exercise professional judgment, right? That you're dealing with fact patterns that are nuanced and a lot of shades of gray, and you have to bring a lot of judgment to the table, understand what are the underlying economics, what are the parties trying to achieve by the arrangement and the like, to inform your thinking about what accounting outcome is going to best depict that within the confines of GAAP. So an appreciation for the need for and importance of professional judgment. And I guess the other thing is, in the academic setting, which is kind of an outgrowth of that, is there tends to be a bit more black and white to the approach, right? I mean, you have a problem on the test, and it's either right or wrong, depending on how the problem is designed. And a lot of things in practice aren't nearly that clear. So that experience obviously gave me a much better appreciation of nuances, making sure you understand the totality of the fact pattern, and what the parties to the arrangement were trying to accomplish through that commercial arrangement.
Great. Thank you for that. As you know, Paul, we got a couple academics on the line here. So it's not next question just came in. Shouldn't surprise you. Is there any particular research question right now that you would encourage academics to do some research in that would help inform the board, either a current issue or something you see coming up? Is there anything that comes off the top of mind in academic research you'd like to see coming?
Well, there's a lot of areas where academic research can help. I think there are always accounting and auditing topics that are worth pursuing, and a lot of emerging accounting topics are related to accounting and auditing topics, are related to technology, and how does technology and access to information affect decision making. I think are areas that are really useful areas of exploration, particularly as you think about much greater use of artificial intelligence. How do you draw the line between artificial intelligence and other technology enabling tools being used to support decision making and exercise of judgment versus crossing the line and replacing or attempting to replace professional judgment, and trying to figure out where that balance is. Research in areas like that, I think, can be extremely helpful as we think about what kinds of things we should be doing in terms of digitization of information and uses of technology and permissions by both issuers and auditors to have greater use of technology, and AI research along those lines, I think, could be very helpful.
Great. Thanks for those suggestions on that area. Okay. You have obviously had some experience at the SEC before you got at the SEC. A couple bites at the apple before you got there. But is there anything that in your current role surprises you, or maybe you're past being surprised? But is there anything that still surprises you from where you sit?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm surprised, but it is interesting, like I say, the breadth and depth of issues. The other thing is, a lot of particularly on the policy front, a lot of the things that we deal with have ramifications where we have to think not just about what is helpful in terms of better information for investors or more efficient operation of the markets, but we have to think a lot about our legal authority, which is not something that I have a lot of expertise on. So I end up engaging in a lot of discussions with attorneys, both around the building and externally, about what our legal authorities are. A lot of economic analysis. So I end up engaging an awful lot with economists and accounting academics, but a lot of economists on questions like that. And then as we're dealing with other organizations, whether it's the PCAOB, the FASB, or other self-regulatory organizations like the exchanges and things like that, they have some different objectives perhaps than we do. And how is it that we balance our responsibilities, where we have a very clear three-part mission, with the things that those organizations, where we do have some level of oversight, but there's also some quasi-independence. How exactly do we balance what can sometimes be maybe not competing objectives, but some differing perspectives on objectives are things that are a really interesting part of the job that frankly I hadn't spent a lot of time on earlier in my career.
So as you mentioned earlier, you definitely had to expand your learnings in a lot of areas that you weren't comfortable with. So what are some of the, what I call current hot buttons or areas of focus that the SEC is working on? What, kind of what's the agenda, top agenda the SEC is focused on right now?
Yeah, so there's several things. One is that, as I said, we're doing a lot of rulemaking. A lot of it is in a variety of different space. But the one that continues to get a lot of attention is our rulemaking on climate disclosures, which is really interesting when you look not only at what we are trying to do in the U.S., but what's going on internationally. Those of you that follow the climate space internationally probably know that on Monday, the International Sustainability Standards Board is going to issue its first two standards on sustainability and S2 on climate. So we've certainly been spending a lot of time engaging with the ISSB over the past several months, mostly through our role in the International Organization of Securities Commissions, or IOSCO, to inform what they're doing and to inform us on what's going on as we think about doing climate rulemaking, because we're trying to think about not just what's good for the US capital markets, but there's, of course, a number of issuers that have footprints around the globe and are going to find themselves subject to reporting regimes, not just in the US, if we are successful in finishing our rulemaking and getting it in place, but also other areas. Europe is very close to finalizing its ESG rules, which they expect to have those finalized the end of next month. And there's, a number of US companies that will be subject to reporting there. Consultations have been launched in places like the UK, Hong Kong. I think Singapore either has or is about to launch a consultation. Japan plans to launch a consultation sometime after the ISSB standards are issued. So trying to think about how what we're doing to the extent it can be interoperable with what's going on elsewhere is something we're spending a lot of time with, which granted is all the more challenging since all these things are moving pieces and none of them are static. So trying to sort that out is a challenge, but that's obviously one that we're spending a lot of time on. Crypto space is another thing we're spending a lot of time on. We've certainly been dealing with a number of accounting issues over the last couple of years, which has led to some guidance that we've issued on some accounting issues. We've certainly had a number of enforcement issues that have been happening because of people operating exchanges without registering, or cryptos that are securities without registering the securities for sales and the like. And so we've been spending a lot of time supporting colleagues in enforcement as they look at that. We're certainly helping to support the Division of Corporation Finance, which has created a crypto group within its filing review program because of the number of crypto type entities that are in the process of trying to register. So that's certainly another space where we spend a lot of time. And then the other is on three things driven by current events. So in light of current events over the last few months, questions about going concern reporting have certainly come to the forefront. Questions about risk assessment and to what degree is risk assessment integrated into the entity's processes with respect to internal control effectiveness and consequences to financial reporting, where we've had a handful of cases where we've dealt with registrants where when you identify errors and you identify control deficiencies, the root cause actually ends up being some challenges at entity level risk assessment. That some of it ends up manifesting itself in process level issues, but the root cause actually is shortcomings in entity level risk assessment. And so that's another area we've been spending a lot of time in engaging and trying to communicate on, is the importance of entity level risk assessment processes, not just to identify and manage business risk, but also to integrate those into internal control effectiveness. You all know, of course, that risk assessment is an integral component of the COSO framework. Don't have to tell Mark that, who wrote most of that, and also flows into the quality of financial reporting.
Yeah, I think Mark was very happy about your risk assessment comments there, Paul. Did he pay you to do that commercial, by the way, in the middle of it or not?
You're speaking my lingo, Paul. Thank you.
Very good. You mentioned earlier a little bit about technology, artificial intelligence. I'm going to ask you to look in your crystal ball kind of a little bit there, Paul. Where do you see all this headed in the accounting profession? If you can kind of look through where you sit, because you talk of a lot of companies, a lot of accounting firms and stuff, but where do you see how's this all going to impact, kind of play out in the profession, as you said?
Yeah, that's a terrific question. I do think, Scott, that the title of this is really a terrific title. I think as a member of the accounting profession and being successful in the accounting profession, it is a commitment to lifelong learning. So I really like the title of that. And to me, this is, just part of that process. I mean, if you think back to when we started our careers, there was very little, if any, use of a computer, right? And obviously that has changed over the last 3 or 4 decades. And even if you look at technological advances in the last 5 to 10 years, have been terrific changes there. And so, this is kind of the next generation of that. But with each of those, there are certainly opportunities and benefits that come about from that, including opportunities for efficiencies to take place. I mean, candidly, why is it that investors want more information? Well, because they can get access to more information and they can process more information than they could have 20, 30, 40 years ago. So there are certainly efficiencies that take place from that. But there are dangers, of course, with any technological advancement. And as I was talking earlier, I think the same thing is true when we think about AI, that if it is thought of and used as a tool to enhance professional judgment, I think it can be very useful. But I think, like with any technological advancement, there are risks attached to it. Because of scale here, the risk might be even more significant in some of these kinds of circumstances. So I think we have to approach it with, I'll use the term professional skepticism, and try to make sure that we do what we can to ensure that these kind of technology tools are used in an appropriate way so that they complement professional judgment, professional decision-making, and aren't tried to, and they aren't deployed in a manner so as to allow, whoever's programmed the machine learning to go off in decision-making directions that aren't subject to supervision and human decision-making.
Great. I'm going to give everybody a warning. We had about 10 minutes left. So if you got any questions, please formulate. I'm going to ask Paul one more question and then we'll open it up. See if anybody has any other questions I want to ask Paul. But from where you sit, you mentioned earlier, you're obviously very busy, but what are you losing sleep over? As you look out across the profession, what causes you pause?
The biggest thing that I worry about is what's the big issue out there that I don't know about, to be honest with you. I think the issues that we know about, we can get our arms around and try to do things to address them through the various tools that we have. But I really worry about, is there something big out there that I don't know about, which is in part why I spend a lot of time in conversation with as many stakeholders as I can to understand what are the things that they're worried about, because if there are things that they're worried about that I'm not aware of, maybe I need to be worried about them. So trying to stay as informed as possible so that we can be ahead of the curve if possible, but if not, at least at the curve, and not find ourselves too far behind the curve is probably the thing that I worry about more than anything else.
You're probably being surprised by that question that comes over from some Cognizant person, right? So anyway, that's probably number 2 there on your list of that. Okay, so I'll pause now. I do have some more questions, but I wanted to give everybody a chance to ask. Does anybody have any question that you want to ask? You can come off mic and just ask it if you wish, or put it in chat.
Hey, Scott, did you see Leah had a question earlier?
Yeah, I did see that one. Okay, do you have any, Mark? Okay.
Do you want to?
There is a question out there, Paul, from one of our people about really the interchange between the commissioners and the House in the various committees. How much interaction is it? Are you the main person, or the commissioners, or how's sort of that interaction work between the Senate and the House and the SEC? There's kind of question, that's the questions in there.
Yeah, so the I'll call it the formal communication goes through our Office of Legislative Affairs, and then they will reach out to whoever within the agency is the appropriate people to respond. So if there are things that are information being asked for that is in our space, they will reach out to us, and we will support the response to that. That being said, each of the commissioners certainly has their own networks, and they certainly have contacts on the Hill. And I don't directly participate in that, but I imagine that they have a fair bit of interaction with people on the Hill. But my interaction tends to be either in supporting responses from congressional inquiry that's related to our space, or supporting testimony, so that obviously the chair testified before the House and Senate. Every so often he's going to be up there testifying before our oversight committees. We have actually just yesterday, 2 of our division directors were testifying before a House committee. Another division director was testifying a few months back, and so we will be whenever those happen, we are going to be supporting them in preparing them for their testimony, and it's not out of the realm of possibility that at some point I might get asked to come up and have a conversation with them. So a variety of ways, but we do so through kind of channels of communication.
We read a lot about the budget squeeze on the various, all the various agencies up there. Do you feel like the SEC has all the resources you need? I guess there's always more, but generally, do you feel like you have the resources you need to fulfill your responsibility?
Yeah, we could always use more. We're actually, from a personnel perspective, while we did get a nice increase in appropriations in the current budget, we're still down. I forget what the numbers are, but we're down as compared to where we were in, let's say, 2017. And, the number of issuers that we oversee, and the number of broker dealers we oversee, and the capital markets that we oversee are bigger by, several fold from from that time. So I think we could always use more people to fulfill our responsibilities. We always, of course, have a lot of investment in technology, trying to make sure that we are taking advantage of technology and of course, are using technology to safeguard information. So those are probably the two biggest things. I do think we, are in reasonably good shape, but again, I think we certainly, if we had more, we could put more to use. There's no doubt about that.
Great. Thank you. Well, one other question I have here is that SEC has been a big driver in the implementation of XBRL. They've been a major driver in that across the country. Do you necessarily see that as the end goal of electronic reporting, or is that just a means to go to whatever the next thing is going to be? I don't know if you've given that any thought of where XBRL goes.
Yeah, that's a great question. And we're actually kind of in early stages of thinking about that a bit. There was part of the appropriation process late last year included something called the Federal Data Technology Act, which essentially directs a number of federal agencies to increase I'll call it the digitization of data that we receive kind of across the agency, and not just us, but other agencies and regulators in the financial space. So we're working with our counterparts elsewhere. And a lot of that is trying to think in the future about, well, what does that look like? And is it XBRL? Is it, what, as to your point, Scott, whatever the next generation is of that, or is there some other platform we should be thinking about? So we're kind of in, like, say, early stages of thinking about that. There are a lot of people in the agency that are much more attuned to that than I am, that are doing a lot of the heavy lifting thinking. But we're also thinking about that in terms of, well, what does it mean to, for example, audit standards and audit process, right? As you all know, the audit standards were originally designed in a paper-based environment. So we're starting to ask ourselves, well, if you contemplate everything in a digital world, while obviously some things that would occur in audit practice are very different today than they were back then, but does that mean there need to be some changes in audit standards or anything else? So we're also thinking about that as well. As I said, we're very early in that process, so I don't know where that will take us, but that is something we are spending time thinking about.
Great. Well, I think we're going to wrap it up, but I will say, Paul, related to auditing standards, I often question if we would design auditing standards today from scratch, where they look like they do today. So anyway, keep that in mind. I'm not sure they'd look like they do today if we drew it from scratch. But
I think that's a really good question, Scott.
You're going to end that. So Paul, I want to thank you. I'm sure all of our participants today learned a lot. I think it's always nice to get up close and personal to a regulator to understand what things you go through, what you think about, and understand you just put your pants on one leg at a time like everybody else. And we do thank you very much for the time that you took today and the information you shared with us. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Scott. Nice to be with you all.
Okay, with that, we'll call it a day. Thank you very much.
Thank you.